The Amalekites...
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New.
Well, there's a difference in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Does the Bible, yes or no, say that God is the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow? Yes? Okay, then shut the up. 2, do you listen to the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament? Yeah? Okay, great. Shut the up. 3, do you use the Old Testament to justify your hatred of gay people? Yeah? Shut the up. Christians do not see a difference between the Old and New Testament. They only see the difference between the Old and the New Testament when it is convenient for them.
I'm saying that the way it happens historically is God takes a side. The single monotheistic God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God, he acts like a tribal God, right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said.
See, how can Christians just say shit like this and be okay with it? How can God act like a tribal war god in the Old Testament while simultaneously claiming to love all people and that all people were created in his image?
What you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the... Yes, the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is... He goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
To the extent that your male...
And your enemies become my enemies,
to the extent that your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves.
Yes. Get him on the slavery point. Literally bringing up slavery, the biblical slavery, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. It's like the Christian kryptonite. They're powerless against it. Well, God allowed for that sin that one time. Really? If God could allow for sin, then why did he need to send Jesus Christ to die for all of us? Well, actually, God needed to phase out slavery. Really? Then how come he could just outlaw murder right away? Well, you see, like, it's always just something.
Purchase some of the temporary residents may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race because...
Well, how else do you interpret...
First of all, racism is an invention.
Oh God, of course Dinesh, being bad faith and Weasley, is going to instantly try and maneuver the conversation and get out of the main crux of the argument, which is biblical slavery. Even if it wasn't based on race at all, I actually don't give a fuck, because God still said it was okay to own other people as property.
Invention of the modern
tribe.
world.
Call it tribe if you like.
Ethnicity. These are clans.
These are
militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah. That's pretty bizarre that God is literally like a home wrecker. To keep your wife and kids, you're gonna have to be a slave, okay? It's a pretty fair trade-off, I think. And yeah, can we go back a little bit, because I missed what Dinesh said specifically back to this.
He wants to say it.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race, because...
How else do you interpret...
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern world.
Call it tribe if you like.
An invention of
These are clans.
Racism is an invention of the modern world? Hasn't racism always existed in some way or another? American society drew upon centuries of racist ideas to justify this new form of exclusion and exploitation, especially that of scientific racism. Just if America put its own special patriotic spin on racism, doesn't mean that racism is brand new.
When you say, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason that this could not have been ordained by God, but
Look,
it was not.
You have a capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is a massive rabbinic... A capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is
come on, dude. This is so pathetic. I hate that these religious people always have something to fall back on. This is something to take up with the council. This is something to take up with the priesthood. You should be able to defend your faith and answer these basic questions.
Massive rabbinical tradition that discusses
Dinesh,
every
you're
fine
here
point,
to
as you
convince
know.
these people that the Bible is true.
But it's not my job to
I'm not a rabbi either.
isolate the Old Testament from the New and justify ancient battles that have no bearing. Let me put it this way:
And tell me how specifically
if
the New
someone were to
Testament
listen to
undoes
you,
this.
they would have no idea that the first anti-slavery movement in the world is driven by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians.
This is called whataboutism. Class, does everybody know what whataboutism is? Whataboutism, the technique or practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter accusation or raising a different issue. Dinesh D'Souza is doing whataboutism right now, and without even realizing, he is betraying the fact that he is defeated. He has nothing. He doesn't know how to answer this question, so the best thing he can do is desperately try and move the conversation. It is a logical fallacy, and it's embarrassing. Even if the Quakers and the evangelicals started the first movement to end slavery, I don't give a fuck, because Christians also played a massive role in establishing slavery. So if you're going to say, well, Christians helped to end it, you have to be fair and also acknowledge that, yeah, but Christians also contributed to it. They also literally used the Bible to justify slavery and racism.
They read the same Bible, but evidently they don't read it your way. Because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So
Dinesh,
you have to explain why you take...
Wait, what? Can we go back? He's just saying so many stupid things fast.
Bible. But evidently they don't read it your way. Because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So
Dinesh,
you have to explain why you take a universal institution...
Dinesh, when did that happen?
In every culture...
When did that happen?
When did what happen?
When did that movement first get off the ground?
It's in America, it starts shortly after the Quakers get here. So the early let's put it this way, the early anti-slavery movements are about 1710,
So
1720.
Here's two hypotheses then. One hypothesis is that God actually didn't like slavery the whole time. It just took human beings literally thousands of years to work it out, and that just so happened to coincide with the Enlightenment. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is actually that the Bible does condone slavery, and that what's going on is, I think, for example, when you look at the actual verses that are being given as justification for the Christian abolitionist movement, what kind of verses are we talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that first of all, the
Enlightenment... It might have been Christians who did it, but they were, to say that they were doing it as motivated by Christianity is a different kind of claim.
It is.
That's very true, and I'm really glad he called him on that. That's actually a really good point that I try to use that argument too, but I missed that one. Even if you say Christians helped to end slavery, what was their actual motivation? Where in the Bible did it say slavery bad? Somebody doing a good thing and them happening to be a Christian while doing that good thing does not mean they did a good thing because they were a Christian.
It is a very significant claim because to you, the Bible exists in an interpretive tradition that has been expostulated over many centuries by Christians. They're reading that Bible. They're reading it with great care as to what it's trying to say. And the Enlightenment, far from being the origin of any of this, in fact, the racism that came out of the Enlightenment was of a species that never existed before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel, Kant.
First of all, nobody gives a shit about Kant, but you are kind of being a cunt. Second of all, again, what does this have to do with anything? It's true that there was a different kind of racism that came about during the American slave trade. This is all true. But so it doesn't mean that it wasn't racism before.
Before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel, Kant, Their denunciations of blacks, for example, you'll find nothing like that in the Old Testament, leave alone the New.
And if modern Enlightenment thinkers were beholden to think that these Enlightenment thinkers were ineffable, creators of an inviolable ethic, then we'd probably have had a harder time getting rid of it, don't you think?
Well, nobody. Do you
think the abolitionist movement was helped or hindered by the existence of the verses that I've just described?
Well, I mean, I think it was hindered by them because I think that the Southern apologists of slavery appealed to those verses, to be sure. They appealed to the Old Testament verses that were pro-slavery.
Yes, and then now he's going to ask a really good question, which is, and then which verses did they appeal to in the Bible to abolish slavery? I don't think there's many.
The only way you could appeal to be anti-slavery, specifically, I mean, not love your enemy, love your neighbor. Tell me specifically, like, here's how I can put it. You're in a time machine, you go back to antebellum slavery in the American South, and you find yourself on a plantation, and you say to the master of the house, you own a bunch of slaves, I don't think this is moral, I don't think you should be mistreating them. Where do they turn? And plausibly so, to justify what they're doing.
Well, the answer
they pull out
is
their
this.
Bible, and you can say to them, well, hold on, have you read this verse? Tell me the verse. Tell me where I can point this person in order to dispel them of their
So I
ideas
would
about
recommend to you a compendium of sermons that were delivered by Northern preachers in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Hold on.
Oh, God. Oh, man. Dude, Dinesh D'Souza is getting absolutely fucking massacred. Even I can think of biblical verses that I could possibly pull out of my ass to justify an anti-slavery position. Isn't there something about Paul telling a slave that if a slave escapes, you shouldn't return them to their master? That instead you should welcome them in as like a member of your own family or something like this? Isn't there a verse somewhere like that in Romans or some shit? I don't know. But I mean, come on. He is waffling so bad right now. He's like, well, I would point them to some sermons at the time. What? No, shut the fuck up. All right, I can say Leviticus 24:44. Go get slaves from the nations around you. Done. Nations around me, I can go get slaves. That's what the Bible says. Okay, where is the biblical verse that says slavery bad? If there's a Bible verse that's like, hey, God says slavery is fine and dandy, but then in order to realize that God is actually against slavery, I need to listen to 5 hours worth of sermons, read 20 books, and be a biblical scholar? No, fuck that. Then God's word is ineffective.
I want to know what the verses are.
Preachers in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Hold on.
I want to know what the verses are.
So I'm going to give you their mode of preaching because the key to it is to understand how they use the Bible. It's not the way you do it. Even the Southern theologians weren't dumb enough to say they enslaved the Amalekites, therefore you can enslave this guy who's here from the Congo.
Yeah, nobody said that, but also there are verses in the Old Testament in which, I think, was it Noah's son, Ham, had seen his father naked when Noah had passed out, and for some reason, because of this, God punished Ham and his entire family lineage and cursed them to be slaves forever. American slave traders would look at those verses and would read those verses and justify how Ham's lineage led to Africa. So therefore, they were justified in enslaving those people.
No, the Southerners didn't use those arguments either. Your arguments are in a different species altogether. If you look at the arguments between the Northerners and Southerners over slavery, they were far more nuanced than that. Basically, you had to do something like this. The Northern theologians would say this: I'm
actually in pain right now. That's also not even true. See, what he's doing is this classic tactic that I see a lot of conservative right-wing Christians try to do. This thing where they make it overcomplicated so that they can avoid ever really explaining it. It's just so complicated. You see, the discussions back in the day were so complicated and nuanced, you see. It was far different than our conceptualization of nowadays and modern times. No, it wasn't actually. I just told you how people who were pro-slavery were using the Bible to justify slavery. It's not that nuanced or complicated, homie. It's actually pretty fucking simple and straightforward. The funny thing is, the verses in the Bible that make it seem like it's okay to do slavery Those are very straightforward, in your face, and literal. Apparently, in order to interpret the Bible as being against slavery, you have to listen to a bunch of sermons, purchase the deluxe Bible, and, like I said, have like some kind of a biblical scholar explain it to you.
They were far more nuanced than that. Basically, you had to do something like this. The Northern theologians would say this: are we or are we not created equal in the eyes of God? Yes or no?
If that's true, then how come God was okay with slavery at one point then? If we are all created equal in the eyes of God, how come God literally, practically, did not treat people equally? How come in the eyes of God, the Israelites were superior to the nations around them? That doesn't sound like God seeing everybody equally, Dinesh. This is why Alex O'Connor was asking for a specific verse that could be seen very clearly as being anti-slavery, not this vague, whimsical bullshit that honestly just makes the contradiction within the Bible about slavery even more obvious. He's actually strengthening Alex's argument here.
Equal in the eyes of God? Yes or no? Yes. Are we all equally in need of salvation? Yes. Does God therefore love us all equally and make salvation available to us all? Yes.
And then you flip over
and
the old...
all that being the case, so hold on, it takes a movement now to go from this theological truth to a political application. But I don't have to prove that this is plausible because it already happened.
It's far too vague. It's
far too vague for you. It's far from a skeptical...
No, it's too vague for you. You just got done saying that the conversations about slavery before were way more nuanced. How is it too vague and also more nuanced? Dinesh Dementia, your fucking retardation is painful to me, actually. No lie. You're hurting my brain.
It's far too vague. It's
far too vague for you. It's far from a skeptical compass. It's vague.
This always happens. This always happens.
But I'm saying millions of people believed it.
This always
they
happens.
listen to these sermons. They act.
Millions of people still believe Islam, and some people believe Islam so much so they were willing to crash airplanes into Twin Towers. That doesn't mean the religion is true, Dinesh.
I'm saying that do you realize to what...
Look at the sermons that are being given. Look at the language that's being used. People talk about the Exodus story, for example. You know, the enslaved in Egypt, freed by God and brought into the promised land. And this is a story that is favored. This is a story that's favored by abolitionists to say, look at this anti-slavery spirit of something like Exodus, leaving out the fact that when the Israelites are liberated from Egypt.
Yeah, when they're already in the desert is when God told them that they could then get slaves.
Trying to take the promised land, they do so by slaughtering, genociding, and also then enslaving the people who were already living there. They leave out that bit. Because if they kept it in, then we'd realize that God did not have an anti-slavery essence. God had an anti-Israelite oppression sentiment.
Well,
and it's in the Old Testament specifically the Israelites whose oppression he's upset with, and not only fine with the oppression of others, but mandates the oppression of others.
Alex is completely right, and that is literally the case. The Old Testament is not anti-slavery in any way, shape, or form. It's just don't be mean to God's special favorite people. Also, I'm totally getting a screenshot of this picture right here.
Okay, and all I'm saying is that there is a whole tradition that involves millions of slaves, millions of abolitionist preachers, Martin Luther King. None of them, not one of them, reads this story your way.
They just don't mention it. They just don't mention it.
Right, but isn't the significance of a...
Now this is another fallacy. This is a, appeal to authority fallacy. Okay, that's easy. It's the appeal... Dude, Dinesh D'Souza is supposed to be a conservative, logical, big brain, facts over feelings guy. And he's committed 2 blatant logical fallacies in a brief 10-minute exchange. The appeal to authority fallacy is the logical fallacy of saying a claim is true simply because an authority figure made it. In his case, he's doing the opposite. He's saying Alex is wrong because an authority figure has not reached the same conclusion as you. So just saying this person said it's wrong isn't an argument. Just saying, well, MLK didn't agree with that isn't an argument.
don't mention it.
Right, but isn't the significance of a text determined by the reading and use to which it is put? Let's say, for example, there's a...
Why are you making this argument when you've already established and acknowledged that the way in which the pro-slavery verses in the Bible were used was to hinder the progress of the abolitionists? You just acknowledged this, Dinesh. At the beginning of this, you admitted and acknowledged that, yeah, those biblical verses probably did not help end slavery. And now you're saying, well, we need to look at the practical implications and the way in which these verses are applied. Blah, blah. We know how they were applied. They were applied in a way to justify slavery. You fucking idiot.
Determined by the reading and use to which it is put. Let's say, for example, there's a story of murder, and everybody who reads that story becomes a wonderful citizen, loves their family, and you're the only guy who goes, oh no, really, guys, you're all misreading the text. It's really about murder, guys. And Martin Luther King goes, no, slaves for hundreds of years have taken consolation in the Exodus. I mean, go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land and tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Yep. To you, this is gobbledygook, because guess what?
Well, also because there's no records indicating that a person named Moses ever existed, or that 600,000 Israelites ever traveled the desert for 40 years. And again, Dinesh is like strawmanning, and it's actually very infuriating to watch here, because he's like, oh, but you're just the one guy who read it this way. No, he's not. You already admitted that other people read it that way also, and it hindered the ending of slavery. I think he's just saying things at this point. He's like a robot. He's like an AI just running on memory.
To you, this is gobbledygook, because guess what the Israelites did next?
And then Martin Luther King goes, what did they do next?
Well, my point.
Like, what I would say to Martin Luther King, if I was going to make
I agree about the description in the Bible. I'm simply saying that. I'm simply saying that
Dinesh.
A Christian book has got to be understood in the way Christians understand it.
God's people, at that time, it was okay for them to have slaves, Dinesh. You're fucking short-circuiting, bro.
If your book has got to be understood in the way Christians understand it, and if you come out with a quote, let's just say, for example,
don't put it in...
Again, we've already seen some Christians understood it to be a justification of slavery, which they then invoked to justify the American slave trade. At this point, I'm just going to keep on debunking every stupid, dumb thing this guy says and just hope to be to the end of the video soon. There's only like a minute left.
Scare quotes. Like, you can say, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And if I was trying to make a theological point, I would say, and then do what? What did they do next? Like, don't get me wrong. I am more than happy that Martin Luther King was able to make a theological case for the abolition of slavery. Fine, but I would say that he was...
Not for the abolition of slavery, but for civil rights.
He was misreading the text. Yeah, you're right.
We have about 5 minutes, guys.
Not the other way around. It's like, we have to ask who's misreading the text. And let's just suppose for a moment that you could point to me, which you still haven't done, to a single verse, even in the New Testament, which tells me that slavery is a bad thing, which, by the way, St. Paul writes, where he writes, slaves, be obedient to your masters, not just the good ones, but also to the cruel, or the froward, as the King James has it. Like, if it were the case that even if you could, which I'd still love for you to do, point to a single verse in the New Testament that tells me that...
I'm really glad he's pointing this out, and that's true. There are multiple different verses in the New Testament as well that say, yes, slaves obey your masters, even the ones that are harsh to you.
Your masters, not just the good ones, but you'll know what I'm talking about, where he writes, slaves, be obedient to your masters, not just the good ones, but also to the cruel, or the froward, as the King James has it. It's like, if it were the case that even if you could, which I'd still love for you to do, point to a single verse in the New Testament that tells me that slavery is actually not so good, the fact that so obviously God is okay with it in the Old Testament means that even if you could do that, the best we're left with is that we have a text here which can say one thing on one day and another thing the next.
If you don't understand, if you don't read,
I'm sure I bribed more people than that on the way in. So
Dinesh was just like,
and another thing.
If you don't get this, then like, it's like,
if you don't understand, if you don't.
That was fucking glorious, though. Apparently, Alex O'Connor is the only person to interpret the Bible as being pro-slavery, even though Dinesh himself admitted that the biblical verses endorsing slavery, or at least being okay with it, very much hindered the progress of abolishing slavery, a movement that he tried to credit to Christians. I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen here. This one is uploaded on the channel Pangburn, which was the host of this debate. So the clip we watched before was uploaded to Alex O'Connor's own YouTube channel. So it's possible that that clip specifically really highlighted Alex looking really good. So we'll go ahead and watch one more clip from a more neutral channel, and we'll see what happens. Maybe Dinesh D'Souza will do better this time. This one is called, Did Jesus Endorse Genocide?
The Amalekites...
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New. So
but
I'm
God,
not. If you want to go to Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective.
Instantly, literally, like immediately, we have the exact same stupid fuck pivots that every fucking Christian makes. Well, there's a difference in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Does the Bible, yes or no, say that God is the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow? Yes? Okay, then shut the fuck up. 2, do you listen to the 10 Commandments from the Old Testament? Yeah? Okay, great. Shut the fuck up. 3, do you use the Old Testament to justify your hatred of gay people? Yeah? Shut the fuck up. Christians do not see a difference between the Old and New Testament. They only see the difference between the Old and the New Testament when it is convenient for them.
Perspective is written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he
later,
considers to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because...
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well,
It's
the reason I don't want to
Yeah,
go
of
there...
course you don't want to go there, because that's where God himself literally said, go to the village with the Amalekites, slaughter them all, even nursing infants. 1 Samuel 15. Samuel was like a prophet at the time who was hearing messages from God. So Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So that's very obviously why Dinesh D'Souza doesn't want to talk about that verse, though, because he realizes that it makes God look like the fucking monster that he is.
I don't really want to go there because...
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well, the reason I don't want to go there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is hold on.
Massacres which are ordained.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Which appear to be. Dude, if they appear to be, like, how can you trust any interpretation of the Bible then? Yes, they appear to be ordained by God. We just read the motherfucking verse, dude. I am the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people. He said, do not spare them, put to death men and women. Like, this isn't like, I suppose if you want to read really deep into this, you could maybe interpret this as God saying to go and murder everybody in this village. Like, if you really want to like look at it with like a microscope, like, no, it's right here in your face, dude.
Which are ordained.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. And
why are you saying Yahweh instead of God? Why are you trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
Well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader...
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do you not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophet?
Yeah, let's let Dinesh D'Souza, convicted felon and known village idiot, explain this to us. Yes, please, explain to me, Mr. D'Souza, the movement within the Bible.
Are completely missing.
Do you not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets? I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament.
Oh, God. Oh. That is fucking brutal. I'm really glad he brought that up too, because this is another thing that Christians always do. They always are like, well, the Old Testament was different, you see. No, it actually wasn't. Jesus himself said he came to fulfill the law, that he came to continue the law. Not that the law was done away with, not that the Old Testament's not to be followed anymore even.
Old Testament prophet, great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself from and say that it's sort of different to the New Testament.
I'm saying that
that's not what Jesus thought.
I'm saying you're missing the. I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about.
How in the world could he make the argument before that? Well, you see, you're just interpreting in a weird way, and now he's literally like, hold on, could I please have the floor uninterrupted for about 25 minutes so that I can show you my PowerPoint about this movement that happened in the Bible? It's every intelligent person that reads this it would be obvious to them, but it's just not obvious to them, so I need to do my 25-minute PowerPoint. Like, how can he say that, like, Alex O'Connor's the weird one with the weird, unique interpretation when Dinesh D'Souza can't even answer anything? He needs so much time to explain all this shit that is not there. Well, there you guys have it. That was Alex O'Connor versus Dinesh D'Souza. And wow, you know, the question, did Jesus endorse genocide? It's answered now, because clearly it was within God's plan for me to watch this video. So Jesus endorsed the genocide of my brain cells, because viewing this was literally painful. It hurt. If you want to support the channel, please consider becoming a member today. Members get early access to videos, access to all the stream VODs, and exclusive access to emotes as well. So if you'd like to support the channel, become a member today.